this comes after the presentation by the machine translation expert. In that case, it was Joseph, but what we expect is that it would be a local expert. And right now, I think I have five presentations that are something like half an hour each in the normal planning we have. So I'm not going to go through all this, otherwise we'll be here around 8 o'clock tonight. I'm just going to tell you what's the spirit and how we feel the organization should look like, and maybe show you very quickly the slides that we have designed together within the consortium, and insist on the way that we would like you to work on their localization, adaptation, whatever. So this session is about the data needed to produce machine translation systems, or to adapt, improve the performance of the machine translation system that the Commission is proposing to share with the member state. So the purpose of this particular session is to make sure that people are aware about the crucial role of the data. In machine translation session, we will insist on this paradigm that is called data-driven, that some of the public sector might not have heard about. So the idea is to insist on that. The idea is also to have some examples of the typology of the data. We discussed this very often this morning. Some hints about the format. What do we want to get from the participants? Typically, we don't want something that is not machine readable. What we would like to get is also data from the public sector bodies. We don't want to get newspaper, or we can get them, but this is additional. What we really focus on is this public jargon that we would like to be represented in the machine translation system better than today. And of course, large quantities of data. The more we have, the better. This first session about data needed has to be organized, or in our plans, it's organized as an oral session. I think it has something like 30 minutes. The best option could be that the speaker present this within maybe 20 minutes, and then have 10 minutes of discussion. The profile of the speaker should be a local expert. I'm sure that most of the countries have already this technology national anchor point that could be the candidate, or he is familiar with the country experts that can help. Of course, in some cases, you can't find an expert, or you have 3 experts that are fighting against each other. You don't want to put them in front of the public sector representative, and then you might think of some international expert that can deliver the speech. I will be with the other ELRC members your contact, and we will be very happy to work on the adaptation of the slides together. So looking at my numbering of the slides, there's something like 60 slides, and depending on the country, you can really show the essential pieces, or you can go through all of them if you feel that this is needed. So what is this session about? Insists on this data-driven paradigm where people would feel that we need data in order to have machine translation systems. And what kind of data, and why is it important for you to provide such data? I think this is a reminder of what happened in before. And then the data we're talking about are textual data, words. And these words can come from reports, speeches, anything that is in written format. We had a few slides like what you see here. Where does the translation data comes from? I have a very nice picture from Kondura, books written in multiple languages. What these things are for, when they are aligned in different languages and not necessarily in monolingual languages. You can show something in French and English, for instance. We have examples coming from various sources like Wikipedia. We can insist on that in some cases these are translations. In some cases, these are adaptations, so we have to find inside each paragraph what are the equivalent. So this is the kind of things that we would like to insist on. And corpora is one thing. We also need to get dictionaries, ontologies, glossaries, whatever people are happy to share with us. And of course, what we don't want to get is something like piles of reports that we afterwards need to type in. We are in a digital world, so the best would be that people give us digital things. The practical aspect that we can insist on is that we need digital textual data in readable format. If we get only PDFs, that's very hard to handle. It would be better that we get them in something that is useful. And in many cases, you will realize that people are familiar with translation memories, and they will just say, okay, yes, if this is what you would like to get, we know how to get that. Once we get this, it's important that we get some documentation, at least about the major metadata elements, the major descriptors of the data that we are looking for. How language resources are produced from data, then we can explain a little bit of what already Joseph explained here for machine translation. I have an example here with French and English data where we start with a Word file, we clean it, we align the raw data, we segment it into sentences that are aligned, and this is what is used by the today's machine translation. So this is some examples. I'm sure that we can take, in my example, very often I keep the Greek because that's the kind of characters that many of us cannot read, so they cannot really complain. But you're welcome to take the French, but you're welcome to adapt it to your own language. So people will probably argue that why do we need them? I mean, these things are on the web. Why don't we just go ahead and take them from the web? And the argument is that if we look at the visible data, this is my iceberg representation. What is visible is around 4% of the data. And this is not only valid for the web as such. When we look at what is this zettabytes of data that is in the dark web, we see that very often there is organization repositories, there is legal documents, there is scientific reports that are not shared on the web, and this is what we would like to get. And yeah, I think that's the main part of the presentation about the needed data. At the end, I had a couple of pictures. Bring your own resources. That's to encourage people to help. Nothing prevents us from making some jokes, particularly with what's going on today or these days. This is my favorite. You can also bring all these things to the consortium, and if these are CDs or DVDs, that's probably better and easy to handle. So this is basically what are this session about. At the end, people will very likely ask you what kind of quantities we are talking about. And here we have one slide where we try to see the evolution of machine translation performance versus the number of pages of parallel corpora that is used. In the axis over there, you have a measure of, let's say, translation quality, and on the x-axis we have the number of million of pages. We have two lines. The red one is for the domain-specific data that is used to train our machine translation. The blue one is general language, and we see that already at the start there is a difference when we use domain-specific things. So when people use the MT at EC, or what will become the CEF-AT, to translate national data that is written in a jargon different from the European jargon, it's clear that we will have this difference between specific and generic. And if we move to the trained data, you see that we improve the performance with the addition of useful resources. So this is the, and we see, of course, that whatever we do, we are very likely far away from what a human translator is able to do in his domain, and which means that we have to be careful about machine translation use. So this is the first session of the afternoon about data needed for machine translation development or adaptation to the local context. And what would be nice is to try and think of who is familiar with these issues in your country and who is able to be our speaker. It's very likely that if you find someone with native language, it might be more entertaining than bringing someone who would speak in English with some interpreters that have to interpret this difficult jargon. So this is the data needed, and this is the session that starts the afternoon of the normal workshop day.
When you spoke about metadata on the slide, there were some features in red versus the others in black. So what do they represent? The minimal set of features to be included in?
Take this as examples. These are the idea is to make sure that we all agree that it's important to document the data.
No, it's not shown.
Oh, can you just... so the idea is to make sure that people help us document the data. So we feel that if these are public sector people, very busy and the like, what we hope is that they can devote some time to just tell us, well, these are the basic description element that I am ready to tell you. And then the rest we have to find ourselves, or we have to interview them, or we don't expect them to be working with, I mean, the repository that we have, it has something like 50 items, but out of these 50, only 5 or 6 will be mandatory. Yeah. So this is examples. And we will have to work out together if people are just happy to tell us, well, the title. This is my translation memories from French to German, and it's Ministry of Finances. This is the only documentation we have. Let's assume that. Then either we have to dig into the data and find out things ourselves, the consortium, and maybe with the partners, or go back and interview the people if they are willing to help a little bit more.
So ideally, it should be full Dublin Core compliant, right?
Ideally, it should be in this repository that we set up for the DGT that is inspired from MetaShare Clarin for those who are familiar with the language resources things. Metadata that we have been working on all together for some time now.
And the second question was related to the sizes you specified. This is something that I frequently hear. So what was represented on the x-axis? It was written pages slash...
That's yeah.
Millions,
Depending on who you're talking to, I mean, we can start talking into tokens, gigabyte of tokens together and things like that. If you're talking to people who are not familiar with machine translation and who, for whom you are just highlighting that performance improves with more data, that's the idea. Yeah. And whether it's 10 million, 20 million, just name it.
Ah, okay.
If so,
we should blur the numbers just to make sure that they are
well, I mean, this gives you an idea.
Or
but
the legend.
Can you just? This is hidden, yeah. So can you just? Yeah, this was hidden, so
Okay.
you are not supposed to see the millions.
Yeah.
So this is number of pages, million of words, whatever. The scale is just to highlight things.
Yeah, but what would you answer a question, a precise question? How many words would you need in a domain-specific application to get a decent translation?
Well, there is no scientific answer to that today. So the idea is, please give me whatever you can, and maybe add 10 millions on top of that.
Okay, so and what does the quality represent?
Well, for those who are familiar, this is a blue score, but this is
blue score.
can you just go ahead one slide? Yeah, a commonly used measure, quality assessment. So basically, for those who are familiar, this is correlated to adequacy and fluency, but I'm not sure that would be the day to enter into these details. What we would like to highlight here is two things.
Yeah.
Domain-specific versus generic data versus general domain is important. You make more better performance with domain-specific than general domain. You make better performance with more data than less, although this has to be carefully said. Okay. Well, usually when you have access like that, you have to have, but the scale doesn't really matter. Yeah. Yeah.
And this is very central point. This is very important, and this will be a question or topic that you will be confronted with. So your data source will say that I only have this amount of documents. Surely this is not enough. So why should we bother? I mean, let's just forget it about. And so the absolute figures are a bit dangerous in the sense that we can do something very useful with smaller amounts of data. And actually we have been studying this recently with the ELRC, with their expertise. They put their wise brains together, and because we asked them this question actually, and we can share it with you the result of that. And if I remember it correctly, it was something rather dramatical that when you typically say that you need 1 million sentences to train a machine translation system, then actually if you already have a baseline system and you want to improve it or you want to domain adapt it, sometimes even 5% of that is enough in the best case. Well, I would say you don't even need 5% because you just saw an inspiring presentation by Joseph. He had the corpus, the whole corpus on the screen, this English-French corpus, and his system was able to translate one sentence, so that was a very small corpus. It fits one slide. So it really depends on what is the domain and how delimited is the domain. What are the sentence types that appear in the domain? If there is a limited variability and very small microcosmos of sentences, small corpus will make a difference. And conversely, if it's very general, then you need, unfortunately, large corpora, because otherwise you will not have sufficient number of occurrences for the system to learn by machine learning. But it's better not to make this a big issue in the beginning, because not to scare people away because they don't have enough data for our purposes. Firstly, because it's a drop in the ocean, and finally, if we have enough drops, we can, reach the critical mass. And almost certainly, we will not reach the critical mass by any single contribution, by any single document collection. We will not reach the sufficient number, maybe not even the 50,000 sentences. So, but every document will take us closer to the limit. So this is there are short-term objectives, then there are long-term objectives. This is the accumulation of the corpora is a long-term objective.
Yeah, so again, you should really adapt the speech to your audience, and the idea is to make sure that we collect enough data within the project, and afterwards, if this is usable or not, is a different issue.
On the one hand, you say you don't want news text and you do want reports, but the problem is that
Did I say so?
I think you said you don't want news text.
Oh, news! Yeah,
News
news
text you
from
don't
newspapers and the like.
Yeah, but you do want reports, and the problem is that that distinction is quite difficult to. I mean, I think one needs to be a little bit more precise about what kind of reports you want, because often newspaper texts have got reports in. I mean, newspapers articles contain reports, which would be good.
Well, let me rephrase that then, because what I wanted to stress is that we don't necessarily want to get the newspaper that is a daily newspaper for that purpose. What we would like is reports that are produced, for instance, by the ministry on climate change, on the financial crisis, on the refugee crisis, and things like that, that are produced with some public sector body jargon. That's what I call the reports, not the reports that journalists or...
The jargon, the public sector jargon.
Yeah, we are definitely after the public sector productions of textual data, yeah.
I think, I mean, my take would be at this stage to not rule anything out. I think we would really gratefully receive anything that's sort of like otherwise not available, be newspaper or anything else, because there are these very sophisticated data selection methods that even in the newspapers find the nuggets that help for reports. So
maybe also from my point, as you can see, we have just a panel, data and language resources in the particular country. Rather than saying, hey, we need this, it's a much better approach to engage the audience and to say, or to ask, look, what do you have? I mean, you have heard us now, so what kind of texts are you dealing with when you translate? What do you have in your repositories? Do you have any archives? Do you actually have anything? It's much, much better to have this open discussion and then to act on what is there in the particular country.